All right, so here's my video for ACT Prep here at Yankton High School for the 24 spring. So some important pages to note. The answer key will be on page 103 of your ACT Prep book. The detailed answers will be page 139 to 155. The practice test we're going to be taking today is practice test 1. That is page 55 to 72. So if you're doing it by yourself, it's out of there. If you did it during our session, I gave you a packet that was the same problems. And there's also chapter 6. It's all about improving your math score on page 225. I would recommend doing the practice test now if you haven't yet, pausing this, and then coming back to it later. Come back to the video later. So first, here's a quick answer key. So I would pause right now if you've already taken the practice test and fill in and grade your answers to figure out how many you need. We get 60 problems, so count how many you get correct and keep it out of 60. And then once you get that correct number, we're going to go here and we're looking along these columns for however many you got correct, and then that'll scale it. So for example, let's say you got 53 correct, your math ACT would be 32. Remember 36 being the highest. And remember, the main thing is your ACT score would be an average of the 4 tests, your math, reading, English, and science. Otherwise, let's get into the actual problems that we had today. So, number 1, if I simplify this, what do I get? Well, if I have negative 35x to the 5th, y to the 4th, over 5xy, I can treat xy as exponents of 1 if there's not listed. I can do negative 35 divided by 5 to simplify that. That would give me negative 7. And here, if I get variables or something on top of each other, I would subtract the exponents. So here, 5 minus 1 gives me x to the 4th. And here, y to the 4th minus 1 gives me y to the 3rd, giving me the answer A. Number 2, I have a triangle with angles. The angles of triangles always add up to 180. So I know 180 equals 4x plus 5x plus 6x. I can combine like terms to give me 15x equals 180. And I can divide both sides by 15, giving me x is 12 for letter G. Here, I have a 48.5 ounce batch, and each of them is 0.35. So I could simply do 48.5 divided by 0.35 to get about 138.57. Now this says how many bottles full bottles. So I'd say 138 full bottles. I don't know what happened there. That was kind of goofy. Of the 200 parking spaces in a lot, 6% are reserved for handicap parking. So I can do 200 times 0.06, converting 6% into a decimal. That would be 12 spaces there. 20 are suitable for compact only. How many are not either? So I could do 200 minus the 20 for compact, minus the 12 for the handicap parking. That gives me 168 spaces left. So I'd pick letter G. What is the value of this? Well, absolute value of 2 minus 9 gives me negative 7. I can do the parenthetical, so I'd get 5 plus 2, which is 7. Absolute value of negative 7 to be 7, so I get 2 times 7 for 14. Here, 3 times 7 is 21, but I'm subtracting 21, so I would get negative 7 for letter E. Ricardo. Okay, so 500, and it's 200 more every single time. 6th birthday total. So 500. The next one's going to be 700. Then 900, then 1100, then 1300, then 1500. And I could add all those numbers together because that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 birthdays. That would give me 6,000. Okay. Simple. The total is 7,000. I paid 700 one time. I could treat that as an intercept. And a 36 equals, so 36x, I could treat that like a slope. And now I'm just solving for x. So I can subtract 700. And then I can divide by 36. 175. Letter B. Oh shoot, I missed one on the last page. Okay. Matrix addition. Matrix is actually kind of cool. When you're doing addition and subtraction, you just add corresponding parts. So if I have something like this, I just add, for example, A plus E, because they're both in the top space. You can only add and subtract when you have matrices of the same side. This is a 2 by 2. And this is also 2 by 2. So what this comes down to here is I would simply have 9 plus negative 6 here, 2 plus 8 there, negative 4 plus 7, and 1 plus 6. 9 plus negative 6 would be 3, 2 plus 8 would be 10, negative 4 plus 7 would be 3, 1 plus 6 would be 7. So I get letter H. They have 4 total gallons of paint. Lyle used half a gallon, Ming used that much. How much do they have left? Simple subtraction. So 4 minus a half minus 1 and 1/4. So this one's in fourths. If I have 1 full, that'd be 4/4 plus the 1/4 gives me 5/4 total. I might as well get the same denominator, 1/2. I can multiply that by 2 over 2 to get 2/4. And if I have 14 fulls, that's really 14 over 1, I can multiply by 4 over 4. So I have 16/4 there. 16 minus 2 would be 14, minus 5 would be 9. So I'd get 9/4. Unfortunately, all these are mixed numbers. So if I did 9 divided by 4, that'd be 2.25 or 2 1/4. So letter B has to be the right answer here. Okay. Slope is obviously just change in y over change in x. So I could subtract the y coordinates, 6 minus 1, and then I could subtract the x coordinates, 5 minus negative 3. 6 minus 1 gives me 5. 5 minus negative 3 would be 8. So that'd be positive 5/8 for letter H. Okay. Two similar right triangles is 4th to 5th. So the right triangles, that's a small one, and I'll make sure I get a big one. The hypotenuse of the smaller triangle is 24. How many inches long is the larger triangle? So I know that this is a ratio of 4 to 5. So if I multiply 24 times 5/4, or the inverse of the ratio, that will give me x. So 24 times 5/4 gives me 30, which also makes sense. This is the bigger triangle, so my side should be bigger. So that he automatically eliminates those 3, and D doesn't seem like a big enough increase. Lengths of the 3 sides are given. What is sine of A? Remember, this is all that TOA, and it frames it from A. So from A, so this is my opposite side, this is my hypotenuse, and this would be my adjacent side. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that would be 8 over 15. So letter G. So let's see. AC is 1600. AD is 2000. And ED is 2500. And BC is 1200. Okay. So quickly, if I know this entire piece from A to D is 2500, I can do 2500 minus 1600 to find that this distance right here has to be 900. Now, I have the side lengths, and it looks like this is a right triangle, but I can Pythagorean theorem to make sure. So I can do 1600 squared plus 1200 squared, and it has to equal 2000 squared. If I were to type that in my calculator, it actually does work. So that's kind of nice, which means this is a right triangle. So that has to be right angle there, which makes this a right angle because this is a line. So they have to add up to 180. 90 minus, or 180 minus 90 gives me 90 there, which means this is a right triangle. So 900 squared plus 1200 squared has to equal x squared. If I were trying to get x by itself, I could square root it. So what I'm really going to type in my calculator is the square root of 900 squared plus 1200 squared. And I could type that directly into my calculator, and I would end up with 1500 for letter E. Here, it's just a simple factoring problem. I have x squared minus 4x minus 45. I have a nice trinomial. So I'm looking for what multiplies to give me negative 45 that adds to give me negative 4. Naturally, that would be negative 9 and 5. So x minus 9 and x plus 5 are my factors. I could set both of those things equal to 0 and solve. I would get positive 9 and negative 4. The question specifically says, what is the sum of those answers? So sum means add. If I add those together, I would get 4. So letter J. 15 is dealing with a complex figure. If this length is 5, this length is also 5, and if the whole thing is 11, if I cut this off, this distance right here has to be 6. And this divides this into two different areas that are easier to find the area. Two different figures. So this is a rectangle. So area being 5 times 9, giving me 45. This is also a rectangle being 6 times 2, being 12. So to find my total area, I would just add those together, giving me 57. Gotcha. So coordinate grid. So let's draw a coordinate grid. Now it just says quadrant 1, so that's just the positives. And it says my first dot is at 2, 3. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The first dot is right there. That's 2, 3. Now it says it makes two moves. First, horizontally in the positive x direction for 4 seconds at a speed of 0.5 coordinate units per second. So if it's going that for 4 seconds times 0.5 coordinate units per second, it moves a total of 2 coordinates, which makes sense. I'm giving a rate and a time. For example, if I were to drive 60 miles an hour for an hour, I went 60 miles. So I'm going to go 2 coordinates in the positive x direction. That would be to the right. So if I were to do that, I'd be right here. And now I'm at 4, 3. And then it says I'm going to go vertically in the positive y direction for 2 seconds at the same speed. So 2.05 would give me 1 coordinate in the positive y direction. That would be up. So now I get up, and I'm now at 4, 4. So my answer is going to be letter H. All right. enrolled his two children. One was in grade 4, the other was in grade 6, with the total amount he paid. But he paid by May 15th. It says right here they get a 20% discount. So he has a 4th grader and a 6th grader. Normally that would be 400 plus 500. But because he had a 20% discount, he actually paid 80%. Because if I have a 20% discount, I'm still paying 80% paid. So I can times it by 0.08. So 400 plus 500 would be 900 times 0.8 gives me 720 for letter A. All right. So this is interesting because all these are set up as linear equations. So I need to first check if I have established a slope. Well, looking at my x values here, if I treat these as x and these are y's, my x's are going up by 1 and my y's are going up by 50 every single time. So I would say I have a 50 as my slope, which automatically gets rid of the first equation and the last equation, which is kind of nice. So I know I already have f equals 50g plus something. I'm just going to put x. Now, the good thing is I have coordinates I can use to plug in. I have 3 and 350. So if I do 350 equals 50 times 3 plus x, that gives me 350 equals 150 plus x minus 150 minus 150. I have a y-intercept of 200. So I'd have letter G. Moving on. So here, two of our children in camp. One was in grade 3, the other was in grade 4. Shoot, a second. Sorry about that. Anyway, so the ones enrolled have a chance to get a prize. I have 20 in grade 3 and 15 in grade 4. So if I were to just do it of the 3rd grader, I'd have 1 in 20 chance, and the 4th grader would have a 1 in 15 chance. Because these are independent events, I can multiply them together to find the probability they both happen. For example, rolling a 6-sided dice and flipping a coin. They don't influence each other, so the odds of getting, a 6 and a heads would be 1 out of 12, because 1/2 times 1/6. Anyway, that would give me 1 times 1, because multiplying fractions is at the top. 20 times 15 gives me 300. So my answer is going to be letter C. If I drove 18 miles in 20 minutes, but I'm trying to get to miles per hour, I know that there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. So I just use the conversion factor because here my minutes cancel and I'm left to miles per hour. So I get 18 times 60 divided by 20 really turns into 60 divided by 20 being 3. So 18 times 3. I need to be going at least 54 miles an hour. So I would say letter H, 55 would be my bare minimum because 45 and 50 are not fast enough. Here we get an interesting thing. Well, let's look at this idea of 81. If I were to break down 81, we all can understand that's 9 times 9. Each of these 9s is really 3 times 3. So here, 81 is the exact same thing as 3 to the 4th. However, 3 to the 4th gives me 81, which means 3 to the negative 4 gives me 1 over 81, because anytime I have a negative exponent, I can rewrite the expression in the denominator. This negative actually stays out front itself, so x in this case has to be negative 4 for letter A. I'm solving for I, so I have R equals P over I squared. The first thing I would do would be to multiply both sides by I squared to get it out of the denominator. Now I have I squared times r. I want to get rid of that r, so I would divide both sides by r. So what do I have left? I have I squared on the left-hand side, and I have p now being divided by r. Last but not least, to get I by itself, I would square root, square root. So I get I is the square root of P divided by R. So letter G. 23, one flashes every 8 seconds, the other flashes every 12 seconds. When do they overlap? I could just do 8, and then the next interval would be after 16 seconds, and the next one would be after 24. Here, this is 12 seconds, and the next one would be 24, and find that 24 is the first time. The other way to do it, if it wasn't so easy, is I would break down the numbers. So 8 can be written as 4 and 2 or 2 and 2. So 8 is really just 2 times 2 times 2. If I were to break down 12, I can write that as 3 times 4, but I can break down 4 as 2 times 2. So 24 is 2 times 2 times 3. They both have two 2's, but the 8 is missing this 3, so I'd have to multiply 8 by 3. And the 12 is missing the third 2, so I can multiply that by 2. Well, what is 8 times 3? 24. What is 12 times 2? 24. And now my chains are the exact same. See, the area of a square is 900 square inches. So if I have an area of a square, it's 900. What is the perimeter of the square? Well, square area is side times side, but they have to be equal. So I know that x has to be the square root of 900, which would be 30. Now, if this is 30 and it's a square, all four sides are equal. So I get 30 plus 30 plus 30 plus 30, or just 30 times 4, aka 120 for letter H. 25 is an interesting one. You just got to keep track and make sure you put the right things in the right spot. So the number of tagged deer right away was 108. We don't know the population, so we're approximating. The number of deer tagged the second time was 36 out of 54. So here I can cross multiply. So I would get 36x equals 108 times 54. And I want to get x by itself, so I could divide by 36. So I could type this whole thing in my calculator to find what x value, also known as cross multiply and divide. I would end up with 162. So letter D. In the arithmetic sequence, the 10th term a sub 10 is 30. Arithmetic sequence can be approximated as a sub n equals a sub 1 plus d times the quantity n minus 1, where d is the difference, n is the number of terms, a sub n is like my y value, and a sub 1 is my first term. So here it's saying, what is the first term? Well, a sub n is going to be my term, so in this case 30. The 10th term, so n is going to be 10, and it already tells me the common difference is 2. So now it's just solving. 10 minus 1 is 9. 9 times 2 would give me 18. So this whole thing turns into 30 equals a sub 1 plus 18 minus 18 minus 18. A sub 1 equals 12. The only other way to do that would be to reverse engineer it. So I know that I have 30 minus 2, 28 is going to be my ninth term, et cetera, until I get to my first term being 12. The pedometer records the number of steps is, okay. So they take this many steps, and this is how far they get. So I could say that the number of steps times the distance is going to equal how many total feet they make. However, 1 mile is 5,280 feet. So I would then divide by 5,280 to convert to my total mile distance. So I'd get about 1.66, or letter D. Okay. This is some more probability stuff. So the way this works is you find the students in group 1. So in this case, the math club has 13 students. You find the next one, the drama club, they have 11 students, and you add those together. Well, unfortunately, they give me 24 out of 20. That is not how it works. You then subtract the overlap. So in this case, 9 are in both. So I'd subtract 9. So 13 plus 11 is 24, minus 9 tells me that 15 out of 20 students are in either club. Now, this question says specifically how many are not members. Therefore, there are 5 out of 20 that aren't in either club, so letter G would be my answer here. To increase the mean number of 7 numbers by 4, how much will the sum have to increase? Mean being average, so I just have to multiply the number of numbers, in this case 7, times whatever number I want to increase the average by. So I'd have to increase the total by 28. Equation of a circle is x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared equals my radius squared. So you can see that both these are supposed to be a minus. So because the 4 is a positive, I should be getting x minus 4. But because the negative 3 is negative, I would get y minus negative 3, in this case y plus 3. So my answer would have to be G, because I would also have to do 5 squared being 25, because again, it's radius squared for a circle. Oop, went too far, went too early. So median is always my middle number. Okay, no two students earn the same score. So I know that I have 12 students who got below my middle number, or median, excuse me, being 80, and I have 12 students who got above, because this is one student. 12 plus 1 plus 12 is all 25. How many students earned goes greater than 80? Well, 80 is my median, so I would say that 12, half my class earned higher than that. Okay, 3 apples and 4 oranges is 347, so 3A plus 4O equals 347. And 12 oranges, no apples is 636, so 12 oranges is 636. So I can divide both sides by 12, and I would say that an orange costs 53 cents, which means I can plug that into my original. 3A plus 4 times 0.53 equals 3.47. 4 times 0.53 would give me 212, which I can then subtract from both sides. So I know that 3A has to equal 135. So I can divide that by 3. So each apple costs about 45 cents. Now the question specifically says if I have one $10 bill. So then I could take my $10 bill and divide it by that 0.45 per apple and find that I could get about 22.2 apples, or letter J. All right, the first question says, is all about time. He spent 25 minutes in the store. He uses 2:30. So if I do 2:30 minus the 25 minutes, I know that he entered the store at 2:05. Now, it says he drove for an hour 15. So if I subtract an hour, that's 1:05. But if I subtract 15 minutes, I got to remember the 5 minutes is pretty easy. You have to go 10 minutes back into the hour. Remember, hours have 60 minutes. So this would have to be 12:50 is when he left his house. To the nearest 10 cents. Well, if I read this question again, I know the total is going to be 1855 and there's 6% sales tax. So I can write 1855 has to equal all my prices, so 2 plus 6 plus 3 plus 4, plus however much the bag of balloons cost, X. Now, the sales price is going to tack on to that. I have to pay 6% more. So I'm going to pay the full price for all of those things, and then I have to add the 6%. So I would multiply by 1.06. Now, because I'm multiplying to undo multiplication, I can simply divide both sides by 1.06. And I would get 1750 has to equal this whole thing. The nice thing is these are all like terms. I can combine them. 2 plus 6 plus 3 plus 4 would be 15. Then I can subtract 15. So I get X has to be 250. So I know the balloons cost 250. The price of the doll is how much greater than the mean? Mean is the average, excuse me for misspeaking earlier. So the prices earlier were 2, 6, 3, and 4. So 2 plus 6 plus 3 plus 4 divided by 4, because I'm finding the average of 4 things. And if I were to type that all in my calculator correctly, I'd get 375. Now it says how much greater, so I could take my $6 minus the 375 and find that the difference was 225, or letter C. Now, you spent $30 total. Now, if we look back, marbles were $2. So it's also the X value. So if I divide 30 by 2, I know if I were to buy none of the other thing, I would get 15 bags of marbles, which means I know that this has to be my X intercept. And the only X intercept of 15 is letter K. Okay. And EG is an altitude. EG is an altitude, which means I know that this is a right angle. So this has to be a right angle. EF is 20, which is labeled. EDF is 30, which is labeled. Okay. Um, Angle DEF is a right angle. So this is a right angle right here, which means if I'm looking at this big triangle right here, this angle right here, angle F, has to be 60 degrees because 180 minus 90 minus 30 equals 60. So this is just a simple 30, 60, 90 smaller triangle here. So I'm just looking at this triangle right here now, which is a 30, 60, 90, because this is 90, this is 60. This part being left to be 30. This 20 is opposite the right angle, so that's my hypotenuse. Now, 30, 60, 90 triangles say that my hypotenuse is equal to 2 times my short leg, which means my short leg is also equal to my hypotenuse divided by 2 to undo this multiplication. So 20 divided by 2 would find that my short leg here would be 10. The other thing that's nice is my long equals my short times the square root of 3. So this right here has to be 10 times root 3. So letter B is my answer there. I am subtracting the polynomials, so x squared plus 7x minus 3 minus x squared minus 4x plus 5. I would distribute this negative, or keep, change, flip, or SMATO, however you know it. So which means this becomes a plus, this is a negative, plus, and negative. So I just combine like terms. X squared minus x squared gives me 0x squared. 7x plus 4x is 11x. And negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8. However, it also says that I'm going to plug in 2. So I get 11 times 2 minus 8. 11 times 2 being 22. So 22 minus 8 gives me 14. 39, I see that this part is at about 150, and I'm going to say this is at about 114. So I would do 150 minus 114 to find that this angle A is 36 degrees. However, the question is more specifically trying to ask about angle C. I'm asking about this angle here. So 36 and 90 plus C has to equal 180, which means that C has to equal 54 degrees. Letter D. Okay, for real numbers, which of the following can be true? 0 can never be true because I would need the top to be equal to 0, and I'm never going to get that. Because even if x is 0, y has to be some value. 10/9 is possible, so let's hold on that for a second. 14 over 9. That's not possible because the y is the bottom, which means y would have to equal 4 here. And for 14, my I'm sorry, y would have to equal 5 here, which means my x would have to equal 9, but it can't. So that's not even possible. Here, I never get high enough for either of those values. So this actually works. For example, if y equals 9 and x equals 1. Given the functions, what is f of g of x? So this is composition of functions. What this means is the g goes into the x for the f function. So in this case, f of x is originally x squared. That's going to be replaced with this. So I get x minus 3 squared plus 1. Which means I would expand this as x minus 3 times x minus 3 and FOIL it out to x squared minus 6x plus 9. I still have this plus 1. I can combine terms. So x squared minus 6x plus 10 for letter B. The most common type of mistake is did kids try to distribute this? So x squared minus 9, but that's not actually how that works. Please do not do that. Bad. Multiply it out, because what happens is you miss out on this middle term. So, the easiest way that I see is I can set the numerators equal, the denominators equal. 4x minus y has to equal 5, and x plus y has to equal 2. You could solve it in a bunch of different ways. Such as substitution or elimination. In this case, it's pretty natural to solve by elimination because if I add these, my x's cancel. I get 5x equals 7. Divide by 5, divide by 5. X has to be 7/5. So when I go back to solve for my y value, I know that 7/5, I can just plug this in for here. 7/5 plus y equals 2, minus 7/5 minus 7/5. If I type 2 minus 7/5 in my calculator, I end up with 3/5. And the question is asking what is x divided by y? So 7/5 divided by 3/5. If I'm going to divide a fraction, I just simply flip the second one and multiply. My 5's cancel out, so I end up with 7/3 for letter H. Okay. Here, the average speed when traveling. So let's take a look. I started at 0, 0. So I've traveled 0 miles. I end up at 12,450. So overall, I traveled 450 miles. However, for these 2 hours, I wasn't traveling. For these 2 hours, I wasn't traveling. And for these 2 hours, I wasn't traveling. So for 6 total hours, I wasn't even traveling, even though this is a 12-hour day. So 12 minus 6 says that for 6 hours, I was traveling. So if I do 450 divided by 6 for the 6 hours I was traveling, I would notice that we were traveling 75 kilometers per hour on average. I missed another one at the end. I'm doing that a lot. Okay, what is the amplitude of this function? You could just graph this. Anytime you have a sine or cosine function, the amplitude is normally 1. But because I'm multiplying by this 3 value, I now have an amplitude of 3. Okay, I'm adding, so I want to find like denominators. So I have 4 over w plus 2 over w squared. If I were to break down this is really w times w, and this is just w. So they both have a w in common. What's the first fraction missing? It's missing a second w. So in order for common denominators, I'd multiply that by by w over w. 4 times w gives me 4w. W times w gives me w squared. Now I have the same denominators. I can combine them into one fraction. So 4w plus 2 over w squared. In this case, letter B. Let's see. ABC represents the hundreds, tens, and ones. So this is hundreds. This is tens. And this is the ones. And DEF is the same. DEF. So when I subtract, the difference is greater than 100. What has to be true? Oh, A minus D has to be greater than 100, the absolute value for sure. Because I'm subtracting a bigger number from it, and it has to be over 100, I know I have to have a greater different value in the hundreds place. For example, 536 minus 293. Because 5 is bigger than 2, I know I'm going to have a greater than 100 value difference. Okay. Important to note here, A is a negative number and B is less than 1, so like a fraction. I'm going to use 0.5 as an estimate just so I can work with some numbers. And here I'm going to use negative 0.8 or so. Now, let's look at some of these things. Firstly, the answer is letter B. Okay. So why is that? Well, let's say we're to multiply these two numbers together. I'm taking a negative times a positive, so I know that A times B has got to be a negative number. So it's always going to be less than 0. Okay. I also know that because it's going to be less than 0, it has to be less than B. So that's nice to know, which means I can already eliminate letters C and D because those both say I'm going to be greater than 0 or greater than B. E says I'm going to be greater than 1, and I can't be greater than 1 because I have to be negative. Okay, now the other thing is distinguishing between these two. Am I going to be greater than A or less than A? Well, if I have a small number like this, for example, 0.8 times negative that, I'd get negative 0.4. Negative 0.4 is greater than what I started with, so I'd go with letter B. If A was, past this number and B was a larger positive, things would change. But because B is less than 1, the magnitude is going to be affected. Therefore, I have to be greater than A, and B is my answer. Okay, each of the three tests is 20%, so I can do 78 times the 20% weight plus 86 times the 20% weight. I'm turning the percentages into decimals. And the 82 times the 20%. and the test grade, which I don't know, times the 40% it's worth. And I want this sum to be a grade of 86. Well, I can calculate all these things. 78 times 0.2 is 15.6. 86 times 0.2 is 17.2. 82 times 0.2 is 16.4. And I can add all those guys together plus 0.4x to equal 86. These numbers all add up to 49.2, which means I can subtract 49.2 from both sides. So I end up with, 0.4x has to equal 36.8, which means divide by 0.4, divide by 0.4. X has to equal 92. He's going to need a 92 on his next exam. Okay. The nice thing is this is a nice space. Oh, it's talking about area. So I need base times height divided by 2. Nice thing is my base is perfectly vertical, which means I can just count the y unit. So in this case, it travels 6. And another nice thing is I could just find my base by finding it staying on the y-axis of 2 and going to the shared x value of -1. So that's -1, 2. And looking at it, I'm just going to compare the x values in this case, -1 to 2, so I can tell that that is a total of 3 units. So 1/2 times 6 times 3 would give me 9 for my area. Okay. For some real number x, the square root of x squared is not equal to x, therefore x is what? This case, it would have to be negative for a couple reasons. The square root of a negative in, for example, let's say I were to square root -3 squared square root. -3 squared would be 9. And if I were to square root 9 in the rational world, that would give me +3. The reason is square roots in the real world only give positive values. So it has to be the negative. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this one. It says it's a ratio of 1 to 3. So if I'm looking at just the change in x's, I go from 8 and 2. I have a 6 change in the x direction. I'm looking at the y's. I get -1 minus -4. I have a change of 3 in the y direction. But that is the 1 unit because it says it's a 1 to 3 ratio. This 3 means that I have to multiply both of these dimension changes by 3. So I'm going to get a change of 18 in the x direction from 8. So 8 plus 18 means my new x coordinate is going to be 26. 3 times 3 over here is 9. I get 9 plus -1. My new y coordinate is going to be 8. That's why my answer is D, 26, 8. 52 is pretty tricky. First, let's talk about circumference. Circumference being 2 pi r. So in this case, I know that my circumference is going to be 6 pi. That'd be the distance around the full circle. However, if I'm looking at these, I would notice that it only goes around about 1/4 of each circle. So I can multiply that by 1/4. However, there's 4 individual circles. So from here to here, here to here, and here to here, I can multiply that by 4, saying that that part of the wire is still just going to be 6 pi. Of course, I'm still missing this chunk in blue, this chunk, and this chunk. Well, let's take a look. From the center of each circle, my parallel lines are going to be perfectly even and equal with those blue. Well, how far is that? Well, this is from the center to the radius, which is 3. And this is from the center to the radius, which is 3, which means this whole total value is 6. So if I do 6 times 4 for the 4 different spots equals 24, which means the total wire has to be the 6 pi from the red sections and 24 from the blue. I can just do 6 pi plus 24 in my calculator and find that it has to be roughly 43. Given that b is rational and I is in square root of -1, find the product. Oh, the product of which and the which must be a rational number. If you knew what the conjugate, you would know right off rip that because this is 3 plus bi, the answer is going to be 3 minus bi. So let's talk about that for a second. 3 plus bi, if I were to multiply that times 3 minus bi, and I was to FOIL it out, 3 times 3 is 9. I get minus 3bi. I would get plus 3bi, and I would get minus b squared I squared. The neat thing about this is my middle terms are equal and opposite and they cancel. Now, I is the square root of -1. That's true. But let's say I were to square both sides. This means that I squared has to be -1. So anytime I have an I squared, I can replace that with a -1 and times that times my -b squared. So what happens is what I really have is 9 plus b squared. But I already know that b is a rational. I've gotten rid of all my irrational and in fact all of my imaginary solutions with this. So I would say 3 minus bi is the solution here. 54, I can use the idea that logs can be rewritten as exponentials using the spiral. So x to the power of y equals 8. Now, 8 can be rewritten in exponential form in 2 ways. First of all, obviously, 8 to the power of 1. However, if I were to do that, I know that x has to be less than 8, so that doesn't work because then my base numbers would be congruent. But if I were to break down 8, 8 can be broken down as 4 times 2 and 2 times 2. Functionally, 8 is the same thing as 2 cubed, 2 times 2 times 2, which means if I have x to the power of y equals 8, or 2 to the power of 3, I know that x can be 2, which is allowed. The question is, what's the y going to be? In this case, 3, so I'd say letter H. Okay. Let's see. Ratio of the shaded to the unshaded. So first, I could find that this is 8, this is 10. It's a triangle. So 1/2 times 8 times 10 would tell you the total area has to be 40 units. You could then count up how many total units are unshaded. I get 28 unshaded, which means 40 minus 28, I have 12 that are shaded. So I could do 12 over 28, and I could break both those numbers down by 4. So I'd get 3 over 7. Okay. Here, I am multiplying the same base, so I would add the exponents. So I get x to the 1/4 plus 1/6. I need common denominators. In this case, it would be 12. So I'd multiply this by 3 over 3, this by 2 over 2. So I would get x to the 3/12 plus 2/12, which would give me x to the 5/12, which can be rewritten where my denominator is my root and my numerator is my exponent. So that'd be the 12th root of x to the 5th. In this case, letter J. Here, I know I'm given 2 pounds and they are worth about $2.75. So 2 pounds times $2.75 means that I would have roughly $5.50 in American. Now, I also know that the Canadian dollar gets 92, so 0.92 times x, where x is how many Canadian dollars I would have. If I were to try to get x by itself, I would simply divide by 0.92. So 550 divided by 0.92 would give me roughly 5.978 or $5.98. This is, let's see, the size of an acute triangle measure 17, 16, 15. Not my triangle is bad, it's okay. The measure of the smallest angle of the triangle for A. Smallest angle is always opposite smallest side. So because 15 is the smallest side, my smallest angle has to be opposite to 15. This is a law of cosines problem. The law of cosines follows this idea, where a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine of a, where you'll notice that the outsides are the same letter, just with sides representing angles, and the insides are the same letter. So in this case, big A is right there, little a, and then BC are interchangeable. It doesn't matter which. So if I were to write this, I would say 15 squared equals 17 squared plus 16 squared minus 2 times 17 times 16 times cosine of A. So that would be letter K. 59 is kind of trying to trick you. The answer is the mean only. So let's think about it this. Let's say set A is 5 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And set B is 5 numbers. Oh, it's a bad example. Let's use 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's use B as 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The rules just said the last 4 had to be identical. And set B, the smallest number in set B is bigger than the smallest number in set A, which is true. Okay, mean is the average. So because B has a higher number at the end, the one difference, its average is going to be bigger. Median, not true, because if I were to line up the medians, in fact, you'll notice that the median is the exact same. So that is not going to be true. My range is actually going to be smaller, because 6 minus 2 gives me a range of 4. Here, 6 minus 1 gives me a range of 5. So that can't be true, which because median and range can't be true, the other ones also get knocked out. Okay. Um, so we have minivans, we have sedans, and we have hatchbacks. We're asking for one of each possible thing. So let's think about this. The first car could be a minivan, then I could take a sedan, then a hatchback. I would still get one of each. I could have a minivan, then a hatchback, then a sedan. I still get one of each. I could have a hatchback first, and then a minivan, and then a sedan. I could have a hatchback, sedan, then a minivan. I could have a sedan, hatchback, and then minivan. Or I could have a sedan, minivan, and hatchback. All 6 of those options, still at the end of the day, give me one of each, which is kind of interesting. Okay. Now, if I were to multiply all the possible cars, I'm going to take 16 cars. I'm going to take one of the 16. I'm going to take, now that car's gone. So now I have 15 cars to pick from, and now I have 14 cars to pick from. But I want one of each. So I have 6 choices that are first time. I have 7 and then 3. So those are the types of cars. Don't get hung up on 6 going first before 7 or 7 going first before 3. Order doesn't matter in multiplication. 3 times 4 is 12. 4 times 3 is also 12. But anyway, if I were to do this, the fraction be simplified to 3 over 80. That would just be if I had to have a minivan first, and I had to have a sedan second, and then I had to have a hatchback third. But we just showed that order doesn't necessarily matter, which means I have to multiply by 6 to represent the 6 inner overlapping opportunities that still give me the same thing. So I end up with 9 over 40, in this case, letter J. Thank you for listening. I hope you have an awesome day.